Hi, I'm Michael Depp, editor of TV News Check, and this week I'm with Brodie Fenlon, the editor-in-chief and executive director of daily news for CBC News, the Canadian national broadcaster, and this is Talking TV. Hi, Brodie, welcome.
Thank you.
I wanted to talk to you this week because as of last week, CBC News is closing comments on all news links and video posts to the Facebook pages that belong to its journalism division. So that includes CBC News, Current Affairs, and Local for 4 weeks. An interesting decision, and one that you explained in a blog post, noting that the action was taken because the conversation has degraded on Facebook to where it's taking an unsustainable toll on the mental health of your employees who are charged with moderating the platform. I wonder first, can you give us a sense of how bad this problem has become, and has there been a worsening trajectory to it?
Sure. Maybe I'll step back and just say we are concerned about the mental health and well-being of our staff for sure, but also of other commenters in this space. So that is one issue. And then another issue is the people who are the subjects of our stories. So maybe I'll start with just an example of it's one example, but it speaks to the challenge. We had a story about a 27-year-old young man from Manitoba. He was hospitalized with COVID, with one of the variants, and was quite ill and recovered. And he wanted to share his story. He did. We did a regular piece on his journey. He wanted to share his story so that younger people would take it seriously. Fine, normal story. We posted it to Facebook, and then this guy just became the subject of all kinds of abuse. First of all, within our own page, people attacking him, conspiracy theories emerging, and then they went after him personally on his own personal social media accounts. And it got so bad that his family asked us if they could take it down, or we could take down the post. So this is the kind of stuff that is happening on that platform when it comes to comments and engagement around stories. And we know spaces are polarized everywhere: Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, even our own comments, but it's particularly bad on Facebook. And so we found ourselves doing a couple of things. One, having to wade in and clean up and try to keep the space civil for everyone else who is going to come into that comment space and comment. And keep in mind, we're talking about our brand, our pages that we've set up. We have a number of them, and some with very big followings. Our CBC News account alone is almost 3 million followers. So these are big. We've been there for a long time. But we post a story to these pages, and then the conversation underneath would just go into places of misogyny, hate, racism, personal attack, sexism. And so we'd have to spend a lot of time and effort going in to clean up. That, of course, takes a toll on people's mental health. On top of that, we found ourselves in a place where we were beginning to not post stories to Facebook because we knew what the reaction would be. So you can pick your poison in terms of polarizing subjects, but you would know a story about immigration or race or indigenous peoples in this country, or even politics, vaccines, COVID-19, sure to garner a response that would require a lot of oversight and a lot of time and effort, making sure that the conversation did go off the rails. So we just said, look, is there another way? What would be the impact of turning off comments? Let's measure it. Let's take a 4-week window and see what happens. And for us, I'm not sure if it's the same situation in the United States, but in Canada, we weren't able to turn off comments on Facebook posts until just recently. I think it was March. So this is a new tool that was quietly introduced by Facebook, and we thought, well, we'll take advantage of it and see what the impact is.
Okay. Well, to this point, could you turn it off by story, and now it's just a whole cloth you're turning off the commenting?
Yeah, so again, to any story that we post, basically journalism, to our journalism accounts.
Yeah.
These would be accounts that are news or programs. It's about maybe more than 50. We're just by default turning comments off. We have a little notice explaining what we're doing, a link to an explainer to help people understand why, and then an opportunity where you can provide a comment or to us about what you think. And of course, this is just on our pages. So anybody can post our stories to their own Facebook accounts and comment.
Yeah.
We have comments on our owned and operated website. So a lot of commenting happens there anyway. And people are welcome to comment on our website.
So this toxicity, has it been building to a crescendo? I mean, to what do you attribute? Is it COVID related? People kind of, not that you're a psychologist here, but you do see a lot of these comments. So has this been building to a point, or has it been at this crescendo kind of toxicity for some time?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it hasn't been great for a long time. I think that's fair to say. I've been in my previous role, I oversaw digital for CBC, so comments has always been an issue. Part of the difference, though, is just how are comments moderated or not by different platforms. So we have about a very robust commenting platform on our news pages, and we'll get anywhere from upwards of 1 million comments a month. But we don't see the same kind. I mean, and trust me, these are active, vigorous conversations, debate, and lots of criticism, and can be very pointed and very polarized. But we just don't allow it to go into the space of hate or a personal attack, and that's because we have and apply pretty rigorous moderation on that space. So the same bar isn't set by other platforms. That's their choice, but it's difficult where our content meets that space that we don't necessarily control.
Okay, so just to get a baseline here for all the different platforms on which you're represented. Facebook, are you also Twitter? Obviously, what other platforms are you active on?
Yeah, I mean, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on YouTube, we're on Snapchat, Instagram. So in terms of third-party platforms, obviously Apple and others. We're like most news organizations where you're on, people think, oh, well, it's digital, TV or radio, but really it's probably 15 different platforms when you count out each of these individual spaces. So yeah, this pilot is really just targeted at Facebook, but we want to learn from it, and that conversation isn't any better necessarily on YouTube comments or on Twitter, but this was just a place we wanted to start, see what we could learn. And it's important to because, as you know, we get a lot of traffic digitally from Facebook. Facebook is an important piece of the distribution puzzle for us. So what we're going to see, we're on week 2. It's 4 weeks, and that's it. But it's garnered a lot of attention, and I've been sort of surprised, a little bit caught off guard by how interested people are in this pilot. But I think it speaks to maybe a wider concern or a growing consensus that this isn't great what's happening in some of these spaces, and people are looking for solutions.
Because, as you said, in your owned and operated platforms, you have more control. You can get in there and guide the conversation more. I guess you don't have that level of control at all on Facebook.
Yeah, I mean, we hire a third party that moderates our owned and operated space, and it's a combination of machine, so automated moderation that filters, plus human moderation. It's an investment, but we make it because we see value in comments. We have evidence that people who comment are highly engaged on our website, that they consume a lot of stories on our website. And then as a public broadcaster, of course, there's this added dimension of what is your role in providing a public square for, in our case, for Canadians who pay for us and for whom we serve. So that's part of the calculus. But and so, yeah, the editor's blog that I wrote explaining what we were doing, that blog got something like 8,500 comments, and was one of the most read items on the website that day. And interestingly, for me, what was interesting was many of those comments were concerned about this move as a sort of some would suggest driving the stake in freedom of speech. But I think the irony was lost on some who were commenting quite freely on our website, and we welcome that. I mean, I really appreciate criticism. I really appreciate being challenged and held to account, but I don't appreciate hate speech or misogyny or some of the other things we see in these other spaces.
Mm-hmm. So in that blog post, you talked about being more selective and intentional in how you're using Facebook over the next weeks, and then, as you said, how you can extend that to other third-party platforms. So, what does that mean? What have you done, and what have you learned just so far?
Still pretty early. I think the biggest takeaway right now is that we've drawn a bit of a line in the sand to say what's happening here isn't healthy or good or frankly normal. I mean, really, some of the conversations we're seeing here, it's just not normal. And so that's what we're saying, that we're going to stop and take a look, like, is this the best way forward? But there are a lot of things to consider. So when we announced this, there was quite a positive feedback from our staff. So that was something. I heard from a number of people outside of our organization who manage Facebook accounts, and not just media, different organizations, who said to me, "Oh, we're dealing with the same issues and very interested in this pilot because we don't know how to control what's happening on our pages." And but some of the things we're looking at is, okay, what does that mean in terms of referral traffic? So we know that comments are a key part of Facebook's algorithm in terms of how it determines what is engagement on Facebook and therefore exposure to your content. More engagement, the more exposure, the wider reach for your stories. So we would expect that there'll be a drop in exposure and therefore a drop in the amount of audience that comes to our website. So that's one thing we're going to look at. Anecdotally, we're going to look at how the audience is reacting, and we are tracking all messages that come to our company through our audience relations department and on social channels and email. And it's a mix. It's about my last check, it was about 50-50 in favor and against. And then we'll gather up the data and then take a look at is this feasible for the future? We really haven't made any decisions about what we're doing after that 4 weeks. We really wanted to first just measure impact. Right. What does it mean for our audiences? We're hoping that it allows us to post more stories, to be honest, to our Facebook pages, because we're not holding back now for fear of what a particular story might create.
Right. Can Facebook itself help you to find solutions here? I mean, other media outlets have to be experiencing similar problems. So has this reached the scale where it's in Facebook's best interest to play a more proactive role in solving the problem with you as a partner?
Yeah, I think so. And I think Facebook is actually interested in this challenge, not just this. I mean, another issue we're facing, as most news organizations are, is harassment of our journalists on all platforms. And I know that Facebook is very much an active and willing partner in talking, certainly to our organization, about how can we help, what could we be doing. So I think it's in their best interest to be thinking about this seriously, and I hope they would. But certainly for us, it's top of mind, and I think everybody should be thinking about what is the audience experience and what is happening in these spaces, and also who's there. I mean, true authentication of people is probably impossible, but we know these spaces are also full of bots and fake accounts, and that they tend to be manipulated by certain interests, political and state. So there's a lot going on there. Mm-hmm. And I think it's in everybody's interest to be thinking about how do you make it a better, safer place.
Have you heard from Facebook since you made this decision?
Well, they've reached out to just say, we're interested in what else could we be doing. And we have regular conversations with Facebook, but I mean, this pilot, this 4 weeks was kind of an independent action we took.
So many broadcasters in the US just bypass enabling comments on their owned and operated sites altogether. Um, and it's just to be clear, being a public broadcaster, is that on the table as an option, or is it part of CBC's mandate that you have to include commenting platforms?
Not part of our mandate, although very much, I mean, our mandate is about reflecting the opinions and diversity of viewpoint across the country. So that's a very broad principle. And we live that in any way, from a call-in show to making sure we have, the stories we cover and that we're in as many places in Canada as we can be. But there's no obligation to have comments on our website, and we don't open comments on every story. Some stories that we know are going to be problematic, we just close them. Having said that, there is definitely a segment of our audience that believes it's very much our role to provide this space, and they are very vocal about it. And many of them commented on my blog about that fact.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that there is a group that believes strongly they should be able to comment on our stories and comment about us as the public broadcaster, because they all own a stake in us.
Right, right. So as you mentioned before, you headed up digital before your current post there. From a resource standpoint, how much of a strain is managing third-party social platforms for CBC? Do you have to allocate a very significant amount of internal resources just to manage and stay on top of all these accounts? Because you've got them not only for CBC News generally, but you've got all the iterations, and the provincial iterations, local iterations, and that's a lot of volume of stuff.
It is. And if you were to actually do a good job of just on moderation alone, it pretty much impossible. I mean, that would be full-time work for every station you have, and multiple people. So we don't have that. So another challenge, of course, with Facebook has just been, you're only able to kind of scrape the surface. We spend, it's not pennies, we spend significant dollars on moderation alone. And then on top of that, people who manage our social media accounts and presence. So it's an investment, and every news organization, public or private, is always taxed to do this and do it well, because each of these platforms is unique and has a custom content it needs and expects, a custom programming or a publishing schedule. So you need people to manage it. And if you're going to do that well, then for us, the question is, okay, well, do we want those people to be publishing and creating great content and formatting our journalism so it works for those audiences? Or do we want them having to go through and sifting through a lot of garbage that's probably traumatic or difficult for them to wade through, and for what? So that's the kind of questions we're asking ourselves right now. What is the return on investment, and where should we best put our resources and money?
So from this whole experience so far, are you seeing another big turn in the evolution of media companies' relationships with platforms like Facebook? Are we kind of coming into another critical juncture?
A great question. I think you have seen a shift in certainly in the news business, where over the last 10 years, where news organizations were essentially, let's do news everywhere and be everywhere. And it's important to not walk away entirely from that. I mean, Facebook is a massive player in Canada. It dominates still to this day in terms of monthly reach. If you look at any ComScore report, you're going to see Facebook right up there along with YouTube. So these are hugely important platforms, but you have seen a shift of emphasis and focus on the owned and operated space. And we see that from the New York Times to newspapers that are just struggling to make money and stay alive on digital and grow their subscription base. And grow their loyal audience. So I think that shift has been a few years in the making. And then I think the other piece that's at play here is just the conversation about social media generally, and what we saw through the Donald Trump years into the sort of the deep polarization, especially in the United States, but it's everywhere, and it's in Canada as well.
Sounds like it's infected Canada pretty deeply.
What's that?
It sounds like it's infected Canada pretty deeply at this point.
Well, it's certainly there. I wouldn't say it's the same the same level as the United States, but absolutely. And we all know that social media has played a role in that, in reinforcing worldviews and perspectives. So I think there's a greater awareness of the role these platforms play in discourse and public discourse. And that married with the needs of media companies to continue to grow their own audiences and control the experience, and ultimately for private media, especially to control the dollars so they can continue to do journalism. That's probably what you're seeing here play out a bit.
And just lastly, US broadcasters are always, their goal is always to pull their viewers away from social platforms and draw them back into their owned and operated platforms where they can monetize that activity. I mean, CBC is a public broadcaster, but is that still your goal too, to try, you have to be on social, you want to be, you know, it's so important, you can't not be there. But is your end game to drive users back to CBC owned and operated platforms?
Yeah, I would say we like the idea of the funnel for sure. But I think we also have a healthy appreciation that there are audiences that will not walk down through the funnel and will expect to find content where they live and play. And we want to be there for them, especially younger generations. And we feel we have to be there, and that's part of our role. But there's no doubt, we also believe that the best experience is probably in our owned and operated, and that we have a lot to offer if we can get people to come to our own websites and apps. And then, you know, the obligation is on us to create a great user experience. I mean, the reason these platforms are popular is because they're amazing. They read me, they know me, they serve up all the things I'm interested in, and they help me discover things I didn't even know existed. So that's the big challenge for us, because we're not tech companies, we're story companies first, and we're trying to catch up. So for us as a public broadcaster, it's a bit of both. Hopefully we build our audience to our platforms, but we know there are significant and important audiences on third-party platforms.
Okay, well, Brody Fenlon from CBC News, very interested to see how this experiment plays out, what you learn from it, and how that changes your relationship with Facebook and other platforms going forward, and what effects this may have, knock-on effects in the industry. So good luck with it. Thank you, Brody.
Thank you so much for having me.
Cheers.
Appreciate it.